Hey guys, this is Mr. Grice for Algebra Unit 8.4 Notes. Today we're talking about solving quadratic equations by using inverse operations, otherwise known as SADMEP. Our learning target today is to be able to solve quadratic equations by using inverse operations. Now, we've talked about how there are 4 ways to solve, and up to this point we've only learned 2. We've talked about solving by factoring or solve by using inverses, and that's whichever one is appropriate. Okay? Do you guys remember which one we're supposed to use when? So, inverses we only use when there's no linear term. If there's a linear term, we need to solve by factoring. So, in example number 2, there is a linear term. So since there's a linear term, we're going to factor this, okay? So, let's look at our 2 quadratic terms. Which one's bigger? The 5m is, right? So that means I need to subtract the 4m squared to the other side. 5 minus 4 is 1, so we have m squared plus m minus 42 equals 0. And now we're trying to find numbers that multiply to get to negative 42 and add to get to 1. Okay, and we did that by a times c, and then our middle term goes there. That should be nothing new. Okay? So when it comes down to, it ends up being a negative 6 and a positive 7. Okay? Because remember, it has to work in both situations. We could do split the middle term, but this actually works for our shortcut where we get m minus 6, m plus 7 equals 0. And then everything with a variable we set equal to 0 and solve. So m minus 6 equals 0 and m plus 7 equals 0. And when you're done, after you solve those, you get m equals negative 7 and m equals 6. Okay, that should be a review. And now example number 2, is there a linear term? Yeah, no linear term, so we have to follow SADMEP. So I have to cancel addition and subtraction first. We have our 7 right here. It's a positive 7, so I'm going to subtract 7 to both sides. We get 2n squared equals 20. We have to divide both by 2. And we get n squared equals 10. Now at this point we're going to have to use our calculator because the next thing to do would be to take the square root. And the square root of 10 I have to do in the calculator. And we get 3.162. Okay? So, and remember guys, that's only half of our answer. It's plus or minus 3.162. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So we get n is equivalent to plus or minus 3.16. And there you go. So inverse operations, and we said that inverse operations, another way to think about that is SADMEP, can be used to solve quadratic equations if, the first thing we talked about, if it does not have a linear term. Okay, and that's the ax squared plus bx plus c if there is no linear term. And another time we can solve it if it looks like vertex form. Mr. Grice, I don't remember what vertex form is. That's if it has the parentheses. If it has parentheses, guys, we can solve it. Okay? Now, it might be like, well, what's the h? Well, the h was actually part of vertex form. So since we don't have, it's not in the full equation, so we don't really have to worry about if it's h or k, or those were the other variables that we talked about. So it says to solve the quadratic equations by using inverse operations. Round the square roots to the nearest hundredth, which is the second decimal. We had to do that in example number 2. So there's no linear term, there's only k squared. So that means I have to solve by using inverse operations. And the only operation we have is that exponent. And the opposite of that is square root, which means I need to take the square root of 256 and I get 16. And remember, that's only half of our answer. It can be a positive 16 or it could be a negative 16. Okay, number 2, same thing. There's no linear term, which means we have to do inverse operations. So when we have the inverse operation, SADMEP, the first thing we get rid of is addition or subtraction. And we have addition, so I'm going to get rid of that by subtracting. And we get h squared equals negative 100. And the next thing to do would be to take the square root to cancel that out. So I'm going to take the square root of negative 100, and that is, whoa, what's that mean? Do you remember? Okay, that means no real solution. When we're looking at this graph, it is not going to cross the x-axis. Okay? All right, number 3. This is where they start to look different. Now it'd be like, well, Mr. Grice, there's linear term here. Yeah, but there's also parentheses. And we can't distribute that exponent into parentheses because there's a plus or minus in the middle of it, okay? We can't do that. So the way we're going to solve this is by SADMEP, okay? The reverse order of operations, okay? And the thing we have first is I'm going to get rid of my exponents, and then I'll worry about the parentheses, okay? So to get rid of our exponents, we take the square root. And then we have x plus 5 equals, and remember, the square root of 16 plus or minus 4. We still have 2 answers. Now, to get the x by itself, we would subtract 5 to both sides. So what we're saying here is we're saying x is equal to plus or minus 4 minus 5. Mr. Grice, how do I do that? Well, you'd split it up. We have a minus problem, and then we would do one with the positive. So negative 4 minus 5, and then we would do positive 4 minus 5. Okay, and you don't need that plus sign inside of the positive. And those would be our 2 answers. So negative 4 minus 9 is equal to negative 9, and 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Okay? Now, another way to look at this is right here, when you've got that x plus 5, if we know that it equals plus or minus 4, you can split it off into 2 equations. X plus 5 equals negative 4, and x plus 5 equals 4. And that would take care of your negative that we just did and our positive. So it's 2 different ways to do it. Okay? And you get the same answer. Okay, so number 4. The way to get rid of it, we have parentheses, so we're going to do SADMEP. The first thing we do is get rid of the square. So we have y minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7. Now, to get rid of that 2, we're going to add 2 to both sides. So I'm going to add 2, and I'm going to add 2. And now we're going to split it up into that two different parts. We're negative 7 plus 2 and 7 plus 2. Because we got the negative and the positive. And when we're done, negative 7 plus 2 is negative 5, and 7 plus 2 is 9. Okay? All right, flip it over. So guys, just remember that we are going to use SADMEP to solve all of these. When it's got the parentheses, we can use SADMEP. Now, before we get rid of the exponent real quick, we have to get rid of the addition or subtraction first, and the multiplication and division. We have to look at it step by step. So in problem number 5, we have addition or subtraction, and to get rid of addition right here, I would do the opposite, the inverse, so I would subtract. And we're left with x minus 3 squared equals 31 minus 6 is 25. So I got rid of the addition, so now all I have to do is get rid of the exponent. So I take the square of both sides, and we get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 5. Okay? And now we have to add 3 to both sides. And I'm going to break that down into the two parts, the negative 5 plus 3 and 5 plus 3. And then we get our two answers of x equals negative 2 and 8. So those are my two solutions. Just remember, don't distribute the exponent into the parentheses. So let's go ahead and do inverse. We're going to add 3 to both sides. And then we get y plus 7 squared equals 0. And a lot of people were asking in class at this point, like, Mr. Grice, do I have to finish it? Well, yeah, you have to finish it because it's inverse operations. We just can't be like, oh, well, it equals 0, so I'm done. No. Now, the square root of 0 is 0, and there's no plus or minus 0, so that part you're done, but you still have the y plus 7. And then when you solve for y, by subtracting 7, you just get y equals negative 7. And this is one where it has one solution, which means the vertex is on the x-axis. All right, number 7. As always, remember that we are doing reverse order of operations, SADMEP. Okay, now this one has a lot more to do. I see subtraction. Got to get rid of that first. The 2, that's multiplication, then the exponent, then the parentheses. So we've got 4 steps. So the first thing we have to do is get rid of the subtraction. We do that by adding to both sides. Okay, so now we have that 2 is multiplying. To get rid of multiplication, we divide. And now that I've gotten rid of the multiplication, I have to get rid of my square root, or my square by doing the square root. Sorry about that, guys. And remember, the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. Add 1 to both sides. And that breaks down to our two parts, where it's the negative 3 plus 1 and 3 plus 1. And we get that m equals negative 2 or positive. Right, did I do that right? Yeah, negative 2 or positive 4. Sorry guys, I had a brain fart. It's like, what? Okay, number 8. Do you guys think you can try number 8? Go ahead and pause the video and see how you do. Okay, so I'm at the point where n plus 8 squared equals -4. My next step to B would be to take the square root of both sides, and right here, this should throw your warning sign should be going off like, hey, Mr. Grice, I can't do that. That's right, you can't. So for this one, there is no real solution. Okay, you can't take the square root of a negative. But we still had to work it all out because we didn't know if, well, hey, maybe that -12, if this was a -3 out front, things would have canceled, okay? So that's why you can't just say right off the bat, oh, it's negative, there's no real solution. Do the work, guys, okay? Don't be lazy. Okay, and the number 9 is a wonderful challenge problem. I highly recommend doing it. Just remember that you need to follow the rules of SADMEP, the reverse order of operations. The first thing you cancel is the addition, and the addition is right here. So get rid of your addition, get rid of your multiplication, which is the -3/4, and when you're multiplying by a fraction, the way to get rid of that is by multiplying by the reciprocal, okay? So you guys can go ahead and try that if you want to. How'd you do? Did you try it? Well, Mr. Grice, what's the answer? The answer's right there. Been at the bottom of your page this entire time. Okay? Well, guys, your homework is on the bottom, 8.1 Practice B. If you have any questions, please come find Ms. Carranza or myself. Otherwise, this is Mr. Grice signing off for Algebra, Unit 8.4 Notes, Day 2. Thanks for watching.